All right, this is Phil Swift here, and this is our seventh episode of just online workshops. This will be probably our last episode until next month. We're just going to make it a monthly thing instead of weekly. On this episode, it is a good friend of mine, Xian Niles. He'll be talking about the power of understanding sources and psychology on the opponents. Zion's been fencing for the span of 17 years. He started in 2013. He's also a certified longsword and rapier instructor under the Academy Duello. He's a former international epee fencer and has even represented Barbados at various events, including two Pan Am American Championships. He's a Nova Scotia Provincial athlete and multiple time medalist. Zion, please feel free. It's an honor to have you here, and feel free to take the mic.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So hi everybody. Um, Phil did a really good job in just getting the synopsis there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about myself because tonight is more about getting to the material that we have. Okay, so I'm going to try to share the screen, um, and you let me know if this works. Hold on a second, it's doing my thing. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, hold on.
All right. Well, while he's figuring that out, if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. Tonight's drinking word game. What was the word again, Sharky? All right. The drinking word game is psychology.
So just one quick second, Phil. For me to
Okay.
pull up my screen, I gotta leave the meeting and come back. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Give it a try.
Okay, all right. Give me a second. Cool. All right, everybody can see the screen. Awesome. So, going to start. So tonight's the power of understanding sources, and I'm going to start by letting everybody know that fencing is a language, and I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time focusing on this aspect of it. I think we look at it as a sport or something as a martial art, and we try to go through the scientific process versus actually learning the fact that it is a physical language, just like any form of fighting. And I've got here the definition of physical literacy as per the International Physical Literacy Association and Physical Literacy of Canada. So all physical activities are governed by the level of literacy of a participant. Literacy relates to the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge, and understanding to take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life. And effectiveness in fencing relates to the understanding that combat will revolve around the physical domain and the cognitive domain. The physical domain is just going to be your physical competence, your ability to execute actions, and the cognitive bit is pulling on your understanding of a play or your understanding of a technique that was taught to you. Okay, fighting requires a mastery of the body to execute very specific actions in incredibly fast sequences. It requires spatial awareness, distance approximation or calculation, predictive, reactive pattern recognition, timing, and gross and fine motor skill movement. Okay, we really should not forget that fencing is fighting. It's a big, big thing that I don't think people focus on enough. Okay, and your skill in fighting will directly translate to your level of personal physical fluency. So if you are approaching this stuff and you not some of the techniques don't seem to work or your interpretations using yourself seem to be a bit wonky or something wrong, you feel as though that you're not doing right, it might not be a case of the interpretation. It might be a case of that you still have to get that level of physical fluency in your body before you execute the technique. Okay? And unlike most combat sports and other martial arts, fencing goes a little bit further in its requirements. And I've had coaches in the past that tell me it takes over two lifetimes to master fencing. And it's what you're mastering is actually your sense of rhythm and tempo and the varying of the cadence of your actions. And you can't cheat it. That's something that comes with experience and fencing multiple people over years. You can speed it up, but you can't cheat the mastery. And the mastery is just basics done very, very well. At the top of the food chain, it is just basics. Even in Muay Thai, which I do outside of fencing and MMA, it's all just basics. When you look at the UFC, when you look at high-level boxers, it's just basics. Fundamentals, defense, conditioning, timing, that sort of thing. Those are things that will win you competitions. It'll win you just basic spars. It'll keep you alive in this most earnest setting. And mastery plus athleticism, because you have to have both, and you don't have to be going over the hilt with athleticism. Sorry, will lead to a very high level of physical fluency. Okay, so when we talk about understanding the language, fencing speaks in a very special way, and it's all about control. All of the sources revolve around control, and the control in that you're refusing the opponent the chance to offend and harm you, right? Fencing, you hear different masters talk about fencing as the art of defense versus the art of offense, and it's all about your knowledge of how to exercise control over another physical person or body. And to do the control of a bout, you need to have knowledge of suppression, tempo, and rhythm. Suppression, I call it that, is basically your fencing tactics, your refused postures, your avoiding, denied crossing, dominant crossing using breadth, proportion, and leverage. And that is the interaction of your swords together, right? This is not a bind. I'm going to explain later on how I view binds. And then we have shuffling the deck, and that's figuring out what makes your opponent tick, okay? You can't convince somebody to do what you want them to do. You have to encourage them. And the only way to do that is to figure out what they are about. They're going to show you in the first 5 to 10 seconds of the bout what their thing is. Some people are very nervous, some people are very calm, some people are very collected, some people are very composed. It's not for you to try to take them out of that element, it's for you to work with it. Okay? And once you figure out the tempo, you start executing what's called unanswered touching. And unanswered touching is just you're hitting them and they can't respond. Every attack you hit is just a score, and that's it. There's nothing left for them other than to be hit. Okay? And that's almost like perfect fencing. Now, does it happen all the time? No, because fencing is a fighting and fighting can be ugly. It's never going to be always perfect. But if you're striving for the unanswered touch, which is coming from the breaking of the rhythm and denying the opponent the opportunity to regain it, you will see the merits of controlling them. Because fencing is all about staying on the bicycle, as I tell my students. When you fall off the bicycle, that's when you're going to get opened up on. Okay, and a lot of times matches are lost because one person lost their rhythm and they never got it back. Okay, and to further emphasize the point of an unanswered touch, you have to have good patience. You have to vary your looks. So when you're holding guards, it's not because you're trying to say, oh, hit me here or do this. You're literally using frames to position the person where you want to hit them. And that's something that I don't think people focus on enough. They look at guards as almost like a layer, like what the Germans would term like a layer, right? Where you wait and you have to flush the person out and it's a place to defend. No. Just like in boxing and fighting, you want to use your punches to place the person where you want them to be. Obviously, in fencing, a lot of that happens outside of distance. And as you come to the close, that's when you start touching the person with your sword. Edge or point, doesn't matter. But you have to give them varying looks, and each look is going to cause them to move in a certain way. And if you can use that look to get them to freeze or to pause for just a moment, you have the seconds that you need to jump in. And another way of how you vary your look is cadence. Slow down, speed up. Slow down, stutter, stagger. Don't ever do the same thing consistently through a bout because you'll be red. And once you're red, that's it. Okay? So generally, and this I was taught this, you really should not be scoring a touch after the first 6 to 10 seconds of a bout. And I know that might seem like a long time, but that's the general rule. There are exceptions to the rule. You're going to have opponents who will give you your touch within the first 3 seconds because they're just going to shoot out the gate. They're going to try to hit you, or they're going to make a critical mistake, and you're just going to take a freebie. There's nothing wrong with taking freebies. You just take it. Don't complain about that. Just take the freebie. But if you're fighting somebody of equal skill and you're fighting for keeps, as in it's the last match of the day at a tournament, or you're fighting in a sparring situation, King of the Hill, for your club or something, they're going to come with their A game. And your A game should be the first 10 seconds to figure out what patterns that they have, because everybody has patterns. They have triggers. You got to figure out, if I use a particular frame, does this elicit a type of trigger? And how do I exploit that trigger? You got to analyze them. And then once you've analyzed it, then you just set the pace and you keep it, right? You dictate the action. You might not be scoring, but each time that you hold a frame, each time you move them in position, each time you're doing something, it's not allowing them to get set. And that's going to cause confusion and calamity. And we're going to talk about that in a second when it comes to psychology. And like I said before, you have to vary the cadence of your rhythm. So you have to either accelerate, every good touch should accelerate to the end, or if you're staggering the person and showing them a different look, you have to accelerate, slow down, accelerate, go again. You shouldn't be going at 80 miles per hour all the time, right? You got to think of it like a drag race. Okay, think of it like a drag race, because once you catch them, you just plow them down. That's it. Okay, and if it happens to you that you've lost your rhythm, or someone's fencing really well and they take you off of your mojo, then you just focus on getting back your rhythm. Everything's going to fall back into place. Don't worry about if they're scoring on you, right? Don't worry about if it seems as though, oh man, nothing's going to work or nothing. You just focus on getting back to your rhythm and you'll be okay. Because then once you're able to calm down, you get your breathing under control, then you can start looking at, okay, what do I need to do in this moment to get back these touches to level the playing field? If it's a competitive setting. If it's a martial arts setting, if you're sparring with a martial premise in mind, then of course you have to think about, okay, let me look at damage mitigation, because I got touched, right? I got hit. So I got to think, okay, well, in my head, how serious would that have been? Can I continue on? Right? Those are things, depending on the context of what you're doing, how you would exercise your play. So it is a brutal, like any form of fighting, it's a brutal conversation, right? And the psychology of a bout, doesn't matter if you're using weapons or if you're doing unarmed, the person who doesn't want to be there is going to lose, right? It all comes down to who shows up most on the day. Doesn't mean that it's all who is the most aggressive person. It's a person who's willing to see it through to the end. Okay? When you're fighting at a very high level, you can't win by striking your opponent multiple times. You can't. You have to take away their will to fight, right? How many times have you seen matches where someone has an insane 8 point lead and then there's a second win, almost like a something over the over yonder that takes the other fighter to then come back from sure defeat and obviously win, right? Because they never gave up. And that's because the person is scoring on them, but they're not psychologically affecting them with each score, right? They're just touching them, touching them, touching them, touching them. Yeah, they got the lead. Yeah, you're winning, but you're not actually defeating the person. You're not actually fighting them. You're just having target practice. So I have 5 things that we use when I teach my students here to break people down. Okay, and it's going to seem cruel, but in the sources they actually have this as well. This is just a modernization of what they talk about in the sources. And basically is, first you got to take away their favorite thing, right? Everyone has a favorite technique. Everyone has a favorite toy that they're going to bring out within the first 10 seconds of the bout, right? They're going to be a preferred attack, something that they're going to do, and they're going to show it to you. You just have to wait. You just have to wait, right? Be patient. They'll show it to you. Once you're able to not let them get set, so either you disrupt them in some way with positioning or how your sword is moving, that they can't just automatically do their favorite thing, then you have to convince them to attack into your defense. So that's in an Italian sense, that would be using absence of blade, right? My sword is no longer there for you to find me, so now you have to attack. And if I can catch you the false edge and then hit you, yep, that's all good for me, okay? And there are different systems and different approaches to how you do this, but it's basically you have to convince them to attack. So you give them the initiative. You say, okay, now you come at me. You're still setting the pace, right? Just because you aren't aggressing or it doesn't look to the onlooker as though you were aggressing, it doesn't mean you're not in control of the fight. Always remember control, okay? Once you get them to attack, then you cause them to make them miss. Okay, so that could be a blow that's easily parried. It could be a blow that they try to do a Zort copter on you if you're using long swords, and nothing touches. Well, they're just expending a bunch of energy. They're short of breath. They reset. You may have gotten a cheap point on them once they did the Zort copter that missed, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? They start thinking. When you start to think mid-fight, you're no longer breathing. Everything that you're doing in a fight relates to your breath. Everything. If your breath becomes disrupted, you're going to start having doubt. You're going to start panicking in some way. You're going to start having moments of indecision. Indecision will be always capitalized on by a good opponent. They're almost looking for it every time. Once you create that in your opponent, however, now you attack them at will. So I talked about earlier of going to disrupt their tempo, right? So once you figure out the tempo, now you attack. And that's where you start getting that unanswered touch. So it can be as simple as just thrusting them, right? Say you have a side sword or a rapier. You're just thrusting them with just a stoccata, neutral wrist. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just boom, I got you, that's it, touch, done, okay? Once they start getting hit at will, as though nothing that they do can stop your attack, once they start having the despair of trying to attack you, but all of a sudden you're just covering it and then riposting on them without answer, they will then have a moment of what I call, oh hell, and that's a hesitation moment. And the hesitation moment is when they just will stop, and you can count it. You can go back and look at so many different examples of footage from tournaments around the world, even your friendly sparring session. If you record yourselves, which I always advocate people do, record yourselves and see what's happening, because that's a really good way to inform how you fence. You're going to see a moment in yourself or your opponent where you just stop. It's almost like a deer in the headlights moment where it's just like their brain's thinking on overdrive. How do I stop this? How do I get back on top? And then once they're in that full state of panic, then you do what I tell my students to do, is just walk them down. And that's when you start pressing the issue. You just start taking the space. They can't back up, they can't sidestep, they can't get up, they can only accept what's going to happen to them. Okay? And that's how you psychologically break people down, right? And it can be done for any sword or any combination of weapons. It doesn't have to be, it's not just exclusive to one, okay? So you don't have to do anything crazy from a tournament that you saw or some trick that someone pulled out somewhere a couple of years ago or something. You can literally just look at your sources. It's all there in the sources. But you have to learn how to establish effective dialogue. And effective dialogue is the credibility of your interpretation, okay? But to get to that process, if you haven't had any experience doing this, if you're not in a cell that's kind of organized and everyone's doing their own thing, and that's okay, that's perfectly fine, you should try to focus on becoming fluent in the basics of fencing first. And one of the really good ways of doing that is to pick up a later period source. It could be rapier, it could be saber, it could be backsword, it could be broadsword, it could be anything that is clearly defined as to here is how you fence, the how to, right? This is how you do it, right? Because when you go back to the older sources, they don't have that. They expect you to know how to do it, okay? And and unless you have that internalized language in the body, when you see certain terms and you see certain executions of technique, you're going to be caught in the no man's land of, well, that works when it's compliant, but it doesn't work when it's going at full tilt, so why are we doing this, right? You start asking yourself these questions. Once you have the basics, like I said, go back to the source that you want to study, and then you want to search for specific patterns or conclusions of play. A lot of sources have almost like a supreme technique, right? They have a supreme technique, or they have a particular way how they end the combat, right? For example, you know that the Germans love the Swearschau, right? The Swearschau is a thing that they use, is a big thing they set up with all the time. If we go a little bit later, the Bolognese have the imbroccata, right? Which is famous in almost all of later period fencing in Italy, but the Bolognese really expound on the imbroccata and ending plays with it, right? Also starting plays with it as well too. So you got to look for these patterns. Yeah, you got to look for a particular parry or trigger, right? And then you want to look for a theme to help your understanding of the basics. You flesh out your ideas, and then you start your interpretation, right? And the process of how you do this is you strip down your parts. And I call this refining your grammar. So you strip away all the superfluous stuff. Keep it dirt simple. What is the most basic way that you can execute your play, the idea that you have? Is it mechanically sound? Am I hurting my body in doing this particular translation of this technique? Does it feel good? Right? That's a big tell. Does it feel good? Does it feel as though I have to do something different to make it work in myself? Not what the opponent's doing. They're just feeding the attack, right? Does the description fit the text? That's another thing. Does it fit the text? And then you have to explore the context of the play in that moment. Run it live 2 to 3 times. Once you've run it live 2 to 3 times, scrap it, completely forget it, get rid of it, toss it, almost like you're designing a car. You big a big design, done. Repeat the process, and then what you do is you get your opponent or the person who's helping you with your translation to become more fluent or to become more complicated, right? Add complexity. So instead of the person just aimlessly feeding an attack, have them respond how they really would if they made an attack and then they miss or you parried it, right? Have an actual live reaction and then have them respond to your remise of following that attack, okay? And then you go up the ladder until you get to the most difficult opponent you have accessible to you, right? So the parameters you set for your experiment, you make it the most difficult you can, okay? Once you have that, scrap it again. And then you restrict your tactical decisions so that you only can execute the play in 2 to 3 moves. Okay? Completely shake it all down once you've got the highest form that you can get it to. And then you're going to use a setup sequence with your footwork or some particular blade move that brings you into your play. Right? Because nobody's going to stand still and let you do something to them. That's just never going to happen. So forget that. That's never going to happen. They're always going to, you have to set up, right? Just like in boxing, you have to have a jab. The jab sets up everything. In fencing, it's your footwork. Your footwork and timing and your postures and voids and all those things you're doing without interacting with the sword set up your offense, okay? And that technique, whatever you end up at the end of the day, has to be 80% effective. Don't do anything that's 50%. You need something that's 80% and up that you can pull off on multiple people of varying skill levels, right? Doesn't mean it's going to happen every time with the most advanced people or every time with the most basic people, but it has to be a general consensus that every time you pull this off, 8 out of 10 times it can hit. Granted that your setup is correct. Granted that all of the stars align in that moment that allow you to execute your technique. And just remember, context is king, okay? So improving the comprehension of your play, you have to understand the context of the martial system you're focusing on, right? There's a ton of different contexts for the martial systems that we have extant to us, okay? What is the end goal of the tactical sequences in the play that you're doing? Or you just spend a whole bunch of time interpreting, right? And then you have to remember at the same time that we have a lot of work from different people of different time periods that sometimes might be sportive, sometimes it might be real, sometimes it may be that some of the authors are completely at odds with each other and they trash talk each other for days on end in books, and they, it's a real interesting snippet in history because we don't have the whole picture. Yeah, exactly. And do some reading, right? Look at one really good resource is Manuscript Miniatures. That's a free site that you can go to look at armor, weapons. Sometimes you see strikes mid-combat and different depictions, depending on which time period you're looking at, right? You have to then figure out, okay, well, what is reality for the people in the window that I'm looking at, right? If I'm looking at the art that's only 80 years from beginning to end, what's the time window? What's it like? Am I using appropriate weapons for the period, right? That's a big thing. You want to have appropriate weapons. You want to have something. Oh, the name of the Manuscript Miniatures is the name of the website, which is all fantastic artwork. Um, you want to have a sword that behaves as close to a historical piece that you think would be for that period. If you have access to be able to get to a museum piece, great. That's a great thing. Even if you can take pictures to look at the size of it and how, try to figure in, okay, how would that actually play in sparring or something, that you can look at that. Then you have to think about, okay, how accessible was my art? Was my art that I'm looking at right now That's really interesting to me. Is it available to all strata of society, or is it only for a select few? Because then you're going to get into the formality of conversation, right? Remember, all we're talking about language here, and there's specific rules for a lot of things in different points in history. Are there weapon laws regarding the use of your weapon in the time period, right? So we know in the early 14th century of England, there was weapon laws prohibiting the use of sword and buckler in towns. So even just walking around with it, you're going to be held by the sheriff. Just being, what are you doing that? That's not kosher, man. You got to check that at the sheriff's hut. So those things you have to think about. And when I talk about the formality of conversation, if you're looking at stuff from the 14th, 15th century, you're looking at knightly arts. And that stuff revolves around fighting in harness or cavalry combat. Okay? They did not engage a lot into fighting outside of armor because at that time it was seen to be less than. You were engaging in behaviors of criminal or some low-born member of society. Okay? So you have to then think of, okay, well, when you're looking at Fiore, Fiore relies on the agente paciente rule in his trial of combat in the lists, right? So you see a lot of postures where he's waiting, and a lot of postures where there's someone who's going to start the action and who's going to respond to it, right? That's a big convention, and it comes from judicial law. He who is given offense may do what, right? Strike first, or if it depends on who's your officiant. You can strike first. You might have the first blow. We call that nowadays right away, right? We call that. That was something that was a big thing back in the 18th century, right? Then you have to look at, okay, if you go to 1485 and onward, fencing is now kind of almost like a fitness and conditioning exercise for a lot of military young men, right? You have the Federfesten starting up now, right, with the guilds and all those guys and Marx Bruder and those people. They're going hard at this point, and that's even governed by rules, right? There's certain rules, they don't let peasants in. It's an affair with alcohol, okay? You can only hit the head. You can't grapple, can't pommel all. There's a whole thing, and then you realize it now becomes an invocation of tribal combat. And a lot of martial arts from across the world are some form of an invocation of tribal combat. There's earnest arts where it's literally to the death, and then there's arts where if I incidentally hurt you, then I would have won. But I didn't set out to do this to you. I'm just keeping myself safe, keeping everybody happy. And we see that too even in the Italian circles, so the Bolognese period, so 1500 and on, there are rules that the art must look gentlemanly. You must conduct yourself in a dignified way. You can't be a thug. So if I was to take Capoferro and put him back into the Bolognese period, he'd be a thug because he's not doing any fancy flourish. He's just going straight to the business, and that's not what they want. So when you look at some of these texts and stuff, you see things, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are they going all this way to say this in their work? Well, just because it's the most martially accepted thing doesn't mean it's the most uniform thing that they're doing or the socially accepted thing in their practice, yeah? So that kind of plays into how fencing kind of branches away from that. By 1570, you have two distinct lines of thought. Yeah, you have two distinct lines of thought. So you have Degrassi, who directly says that in the real art of the sword, fencing requires that the sword travel the least amount of time in the shortest distance possible. And at the same time, he also talks about the false art of the sword, which relies on you using deceptions and provocations to remove somebody out of a guard so that you might hit them, right? And that's what is socially acceptable for young men conducting sport, okay? So always remember that most martial books are a documentary representation of a call and a response. So someone's giving you a stimuli and you have to respond to that stimuli. How you do it, that's how they do it. The authors of some books, like we know, they use their knowledge to kind of game the system, gain patronage, say, hey, look, my stuff is the greatest stuff on the block, everybody else is crap, hint, hint, George Silver, those people, you got to really remember at the time for us looking on, though, that these arts aren't infallible. There's no supreme technique. Quite often, peasants would actually kill some of these fencing masters very often, and especially in instances of offense or even in the list, they would be killed because the peasant he has nothing to lose. If he's got nothing, I'm going to go all out. You, on the other hand, if you don't have that mentality, and you've only been doing stuff in the fancy South for God knows how long, when someone starts bearing down on you like a wolf with all the fangs out, you're not going to be able to deal with it. And that's what happened to a lot of these highfalutin guys. So they would fence, they would actually what we call today over fence people. Yeah. Yes, it does happen. And they talk about it in the sources with fencing masters being taken out by just simple peasant folk. Um, Fencing needs to be a very simple conversation, okay? So you don't ever want to over fence your opponent. No matter what level of complexity you're facing, if the person has 20 years of experience, 3 years of experience, you have to fence them where they're at, not where you want to be. Speak simply and don't do anything without purpose, right? It's almost like yep, exactly. You have to just meet them where they're at and just have the conversation. Okay, so this goes into now the power of knowledge. So what I've got here, correct. What I've got here is the situation of a bind. And I don't look at a bind personally as the crossing of swords. I look at a bind as the relationship of two bodies together. Okay? And a weak bind, if you look on the left of your screen, a weak bind is a direct attack, because I can easily defeat that by flanking it. And when I cross my sword over the line in the flanking, okay, it takes it completely out because the structure is broken. A strong bind is someone who understands this weakness and starts to flank me. So I now have to counter flank them. And you think of this like two equestrian riders, two cavalry combatants, right, fighting on the field. You see a lot of the times when they're, even nowadays, when you look at some of the equestrian stuff for HEMA that people are trying to recreate and stuff like that, you see a lot of dancing with the horses. They're trying to get to the right position. And a lot of the times you see like simple attacks where when the rider is just going by with a simple offline movement of the horse, they just one hit and gone, right? Especially with the lance, yeah. All this stuff directly translates, right? They talk about the science of fencing has been around for as long as they can remember, but no one knows who actually started it. They just went out and learned it. This is the science. This is the knowledge. Okay, so when we're going to apply now that same language to the techniques from various arts that work in the case of a weak bind. A weak bind is Fiore's exchange of point. If I step laterally across or at a 45, intercepting that direct attack, I will score. Vadi talks about this directly too by making an offline pass, and that way your thrust will land home every time, and it's because it's a direct attack. The Zornhau in its most basic iteration, as far as I'm concerned, this is not the truth for everyone, is just an exchange of point. Okay? The Shilahau or Shilhau is just the same technique but done from a deceptive cut with the back edge. That's all it is. But again, the stimuli, which is direct attack, as you see on your left, is coming. And if I go even further down into the later period sources with the rapier, could be Bolognese, could be Agrippa, could be Capoferro, those guys, they would say quarta instead of faccia, but it's the same thing. A direct attack is coming in. I'm going to supinate my wrist, lunge and hit, catching it in one go. Okay? If it's a strong bind now, so remember we're still going to be doing our counter flank, right? Our opponent is still flanking us. Now I have to smash, as what the Bolognese would say, which is just a hard parry. Fiore would call it a breaking of the point. The Zornhau is still a thing that you would do here, right? Because all the Zornhau is just a simple peasant's blow that you would make against this. Okay? The inquartata, right? Or inquartata is the response to a strong bind because they're counter flanking you and they're flanking you. You have to counter flank them, and then you're just going to void as you slip off the line. Okay, and that's how it works, and how you. These are just some examples of how you can deal with techniques or stimuli based just what's in the book. So the last thing I have here now is just how to speak succinctly, and I've got 4 different examples. Sorry, 5. So we're going to look at from the Valpurgis book, which is the I-33, and this is from the first play. Okay, so remember, when I look at this stuff, like I said, it could be a weak attack. Okay, the Student is going to attack the priest. The priest is going to step using that flanking step, beating it with the false edge, and he's going to just riposte with a thrust. Okay, super simple response and answer, or call and answer. The pupil will defeat the priest by crossing strongly into the sword as he strikes with the false edge. Okay, and then he's going to subjugate with the shield and strike with a pronated wrist. It's going to be a middle held that's going to come over top. Okay, I know some interpretations of people nowadays, they do kind of like a Sturz how, which is like a plunging stroke, and you see this kind of rotation. But if you look at the book and you look at the images, it shows up as this kind of pronated attack that they're doing. Okay, which happens a lot in sword and shield fighting. Okay, the priest, when he feels the bind of the student, is going to actually just do a Stramatsoni. He's just going to yield and cut around. He's going to make sure that he pins the other person's shield with his shield to suppress them. He's going to just pop off with the head. It's really, really simple. It's not complicated at all. I think a lot of people overcomplicate it, but that's me. Okay? Now, we're going to look at early Lichtenauer. Early Lichtenauer, you have a weak cut, could be a weak thrust. You're going to exchange. So you'll be stepping, using that same flank, just as you did a couple hundred years earlier. Same, but now you're going to directly interact with it by crossing over. Sometimes what's going to happen is you see, even in modern sparring, people are going to now overcross you, what I call overcrossing, which is they're going to try to put their sword in the way to stop you from hitting. All you do is what they call oben abnehmen, which is just coming over top and popping them, right? Fiore has the same exact thing too. As soon as the line is overcrossed, bam, touch the other side. Cool. Now, when they bind strong, this is a difference. Now, they talk about the strength of the bind. And a lot of people, we think of it as this sort of interactions with the swords. But if you look at what I showed you earlier with the person flanking you to isolate one side of the body, nullifying your diagonal step across the line, now you have to counterflank them. And as you counterflank them, you're going to hit down on that sword with just a simple breaking. And they tell you to wind the edge, and the winding is just a false edge blow. Fiore has the same thing. When I smash the sword down, counter with the false edge, straight up into the throat, under the beard, same exact thing. What will happen in that instance, and this is something that the Germans don't allude to in the text itself, but from experimentation and stuff, you will see that the person is going to flinch. When something's coming to your head, they're going to lift their hands up, they're going to do something. Okay? When they parry that, you're going to strike underneath with an Unterhau or with crossed arms, which I try to translate as a krump, but other people have different views of it. The crooked strike underneath, okay, into the arms or into the face, the throat, okay? If they block that, because early Lichtenauer is all about chaining attacks together, you're just going to come with a thwart to the other opening, okay? Now, if they negate all of these steps, and the moment you interact with their sword, and they immediately flee to the other side, and you just use a thwart, because the thwart is kind of like the interceptor, right? They use it as an intercepting technique so that you don't get hit and you hit at the same time. Yeah, that's the whole science of it. When you look at Fiore, Fiore has the same sort of similar setup. He has the exchange of thrust against the cut, a weak attack coming on the line, a strong attack. He's going to step over, cross it, and then he's sometimes what would happen is if he loses, he's going to do a hanging. Yes, he's going to do it. He's going to do a hanging, and he's going to strike to the other side. Right? That's what he calls the colpi di Villano, and that's because you have somebody who's won the bind. Right? He's won the bind. He's won the crossing. You now have to flee. But in most cases, what Fiore does is as soon as he does that same sort of breaking, which is your basic Zornhau, and going straight into the false edge wind, as the Germans would say, he then goes even further in that he goes straight to the close, hits you with a pommel, and then takes you down. Because his whole art is all about subjugating you physically. Okay? So there's all similar, sometimes not so similar, but it's all the same stimuli. Now if we go forward to what I specialize in, which is the Bolognese folks, they have the same thing, right? So this is all different time periods, same attack. So Vigiani, he actually will call this his perfect offense, is if the attack starts, he's actually going to step across using that same offline, could be a pass, it could be just a simple advance. He's going to smash into the sword, forcing you to, yes, and he's going to force you into the play, which is to leave. When you leave, he's going to hang into the imbrocata, right? Remember I told the Bolognese love to end things in the imbrocata. He goes up into the pronated wrist, which would be secunda for the other rapier persons, and he's just going to thrust right at you, and done. That's it. Mancellino has something similar. So what Mancellino does is that he'll use a falso manco in the event that you attack him to first deal with the attack that's coming, the weak attack that's coming straight down the line. He then is going to push the pronated thrust, or he's going to cut with a reversal to your head, isolating that side of the body. It's then going to change into the imbrocata mid-flight. If he touches you, he touches you. But chances are you're actually going to overcross it to defend it out of the way. So what he does is he goes straight. Yeah, I'll explain those in a second. Straight into the tramazzone, which is going to be a half blow to the head. Okay? So these are all the same things, but different time periods of dealing with the same weak attack. And this is just going straight from the sources. And all I did was modernize it in the way that we would understand it from our experience sparring and doing things in our cells or our clubs. That's all it is. To answer the question, the falso manco is essentially a false edge beat. So Fiore's dented Shingara movement. Okay, that's what the falso manco is. And the imbrocata is this, just thrusting down with your hand hyperpronated. Okay? All right. And that is my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And hopefully that was pretty easy for everybody to follow along with. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but I'd be open to all questions right now.
Yep, this opens up the question segment. Please throw your question into the chat and I'll ask Zion. That was a lot, man. That was a lot to digest there.
Yeah, I tried my best to try to keep on point.
No, that's very good. Let me see here. Anyone have any? I think it looks like people are writing it up right now. Can you go back to that last slide that you had there?
The last slide.
Yeah, with all of the plays.
Yep. So you want me to share again?
Yeah, if you can. That way, if people have any questions,
Here we go.
From the plays, they can ask. Does anyone have any questions on some of these plays? If there's a certain part that they didn't understand, because there was a lot of jargon in the, well, not a lot, but there is jargon in this, and if you don't understand, please let me know.
How does your can you read that question?
How does your analyst is similar to the? How does your analyze? How is your analyst similar to the interaction of the strong indes weak, i.e. in Lichner? In Lichner, it seems.
In Lichner?
Lichtenhauer, sorry.
Okay, so I look at that as the instance that the swords cross. So as you know from sparring with your partners or fellow competitors or persons at your class and stuff, sometimes the action is so quick you can't wait to feel what's going on the bind. The moment that you touch the person's sword, you either know you have the line or you don't have it. And then you have to quickly work around and do something. I look at the in-depth part as that decision process. So when you look at if the attack is coming direct, if you look at the attack is flanking, and what the interaction is going to be with your sword. Did you catch them in the crossing? Did you catch them on the tip of their sword in your parry? Or did you catch them on the middle? Or did you catch them in the strongs? All these things you have to consider. And then in that moment, the weak or the hard aspect of it will be coming from the combination of the attack, so either direct or flanking, and the pressure you receive to let you know if the line is closed or not.
You spoke a lot about rhythm, and that's something I've just like recently started focusing on. especially now that I starting to have intermediate students. Um, in your club, is rhythm something? What are some of the drills that you would use to work on rhythm?
Um, do footwork to music.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah,
Do footwork to music. You want a nice, easygoing ballad or something. Nothing like crazy.
no heavy
Not too
metal or
fast. No, well, no, because sometimes people use music to kind of pick them up in the middle of a workout. That's okay, but you want to have something with transitions, not the whole way through. So you can use that to say, okay, now I gotta go hard. Now I gotta ease off, that kind of thing, right? You don't want it all to be the same. Same as your fencing, right? And then once you got that kind of rhythm going, then you can start looking at, okay, one of the games that we play over here is essentially slap fencing. And someone would have a glove, the other person would have a glove. And the idea is if you can touch the other person on the shoulder, preferably their sword shoulder. No slaps to the face, just to the shoulder.
did you
They
have a
have a soundtrack
soundtrack
record.
recommendation with those
Um,
changes you've mentioned?
basically anything, any sort of like rock ballad from the 80s. That's a good one. 90s as well. You can listen to some classical if that's what you prefer, or even jazz, right? Something that's complex. You want complex music that you can follow along to, that you enjoy, and then you just go from there. Okay. But yes, the slot fencing, really good little drill so that you can start to see if your opponent is a two tap person or they're a one tap. Are they just, hit go, or do they have a setup like a do 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 pop, right? And you listen instead of worrying about what the person's doing, you listen to the feet. So you hear when you kind of like, I mean, Thunderstruck is a really good one. You can use Thunderstruck, right? Um, because that's got a pretty consistent beat that you can use, right? Um, but when you're fencing, really look at the feet and listen to what the feet are saying. So when you think of like advanced lunge, an advanced lunge is always going to be da da pa, do do boom, right? Right? A lunge is going to be boom, double lunge, doom boom, doom boom. You listen to the rhythms of the person, and then you say, okay, when the person's doom boom, then I'm actually going to go boom in the middle, right? So when they go doom boom, I'm going to go boom. So when I'm teaching, I will actually use those kind of vocalizations with my students, and I'll use that to actually get them to think of, okay, I'm doing doom boom, but now I want to doom boom ah boom boom, right? That's how you start throwing different things in so they understand the rhythm part of it.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom Pui does that a lot in his lessons too. His teaching is always boom, bam, bam, or exactly, and that's something I want to. I've been using number counts, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, one, yeah, something like that. But let me see. You also so you mentioned it was rhythm, and you mentioned there was like body positioning. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like doing counter guards, like showing a guard, or they show a guard, you show a counter guard. Is that what you're talking about by?
Well, no, it's basically you want to be the person dictating first, so you are not responding to their guard, right? If the person holds a guard, you want to suppress it, i.e., you put your sword out into the ether, literally pointing towards it to subjugate them. Now, the Italians talk about that as stringere in the later periods. You want to start suppressing the weapon, or you can just start taking the center line if you're not doing the later Italian source, right? You got to make the person deal with you. When they then change their guard to respond to what you're doing, then you adopt a guard because now you want them to follow your lead.
Yes. Um, there's another question here. I use intentions like provocation, defense, conclusion, but that is also a three intention work.
I didn't get the question.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it was more like a statement.
A statement, right?
Uh,
Can I use the microphone?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
Yeah. Okay. I tend to tell my students to think on intentions and not in numbers
hmm
because that helped me when I was studying ninjutsu to
hmm
think and to tell my body what to do in that exactly moment. And
hmm
I tell them that use like, okay, now provocation, defense, conclusion, one and again and again and again and
Yeah.
again. And that helped me also with numbers, but that helps a lot, like giving orders to your body. But it's also a rhythm and three intentions work.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
I got another question here. Just curious about athleticism side of it. Though, what's the best training regimen for both weights and cardio or cardio?
So there's different schools of thought on it. Um, I would say you have to cycle your weight training. You can't do the same thing consistently for months on end. You have to cycle. You have to have a phase where you're going through plyometric. You have to have a phase where you're going through concentric. You have to have a phase where you're just working on just general strength building. Okay? Because the reality is that in a fencing bout, you're going to be using all those different phases. You're not going to be just doing one kerpow and then hope for the best. Yeah. It
Uh,
was it was you, Joe. So you can use your yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
okay. Uh, I've been in strength conditioning for years, and
Yeah.
but my cardio needs to be worked on. But I'm just curious, can you balance it out? Or I know it's a stupid question, but
It's no, it's not a dumb question. It's a perfectly valid question. Um, I would say as you grow closer to an event, focus on the cardio,
okay,
right? Stage it, right? Don't go like insane in the first bit, right? Build yourself up, right? It's
okay.
almost like a crescendo in music, right? It's almost like a crescendo. You want to build yourself up onto that last bit, and then that's that. Yeah. So that's how you would build it. I would not say like for example, and you want to do actions that are as close to what you're going to be doing in your fighting as possible. So, for example, a lot of landmines is really good. You know what a landmine is? When you
Uh,
have
you mean like the barbell? You attach it to
yes,
the
yes, that is really good for building a kinetic chain of movement of your sword going forward. It's really good. You want to do things as close to what you're doing in your training or your sparring as possible. You don't want to do something that's physically removed from that.
I've been doing some military strict barbell press. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, is that good for strength or
That
I
builds
mean,
well, that builds up um, shoulder explosivity, but you want to look towards holding isometric contraction is what you
okay.
want to look towards. So in other words, it's how long you can hold that position
Hmm.
versus what you can do in this moment, because that's what's going to keep you tired, right? Just holding this after a while, especially if you're in a position, say like this, like a hanging position or something,
Hmm.
um, it's going to be just it'll blow your shoulders out after a while.
Yeah, yeah. Don't do the strezza unless you have the back muscles, shoulder muscles for it. I had to learn that the hard way. I do have another question here. How do you work on your reaction time?
Okay, so an easy way of working on your reaction time is to first focus on your frame. So you have to find a position that you can use as a trigger. So for me, that is using a variant of, say, Pasta Lunga if I'm looking at Fiore, right? Or long point. And basically, what I'm doing is I'm going to give myself more time. Okay, this is something that Academy Duello really focuses on. Um, when I learned with them is this idea of using this sort of finding or stringing the person so that you create a bigger reaction than they would necessarily do, which cheats a couple seconds on your reaction time. right? You want to make them make a bigger reaction versus your smaller one so you can cheat that whole aspect. But then sometimes you have to have a trigger, such as if the person attacks me directly on the line, then my response is always going to be pop pop, right? Doom doom, right? That's my, you got to train that so it's, you don't even think about it, it's just boom boom. And then you train, okay, what happens if the person blocks the return blow, right? They might not block the falso coming up, but they definitely might catch that second blow. So I have to have another action on top of that, right, to respond to that type of thing. And that's how you deal with reaction time. Another really good drill that you can do that's not related to sword fighting or using sword-like objects is having your student or a friend at your cell hold tennis balls and ask you to drop, and you ask them to drop them. And you can practice lunging and catching one, recovering, dropping the one that you caught, and going for the second one. Okay? Or another one that's really good is to face away from your partner, so you're backing them. They're going to give you the command to turn around, and they're going to drop the ball, and you have to catch it. Right? Because remember, that reaction bit is in the instant that is happening. So if you're going into an exercise and you know, okay, this person's going to drop this ball or this glove or this object, I just have to wait. You're going to end up anticipating. You don't want to anticipate. You want your reaction to be earnest. So when you tell the person, okay, I'm going to back you now, it's literally what you see, right? It's built, and a big thing in reaction time is seeing the patterns and seeing that frame. So as soon as you turn around and the person drops, you're now reacting earnestly, right? Versus anticipating what's going to happen.
Or if you have like $400, you can buy a bunch of those sensory thingies.
Oh yeah, the sensory things, and you just do all these things, you know, like a cat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've seen Olympians use it too.
Yes, they do.
Before it became like to the public, like accessible.
Yeah, the Americans really were into that in their training for quite some time.
Is there any boxing exercises like those that are great?
Like a
Boxing exercises.
like a reaction
Reaction, yeah.
reaction time thing in boxing. Um, I want to.
Mitts is the only thing I remember. Mitt work. That was all reaction.
I think in boxing what happens a lot is that you do the same trigger thing, right? So what happens is your coach might tap one side of the body and you respond with a particular counter, right? Rather than you trying to do a particular set parameter, it's basically from the touch you respond, touch respond. That's how you train that. It's because sometimes the big thing in fighting is you can't really think, right? You have to kind of sort of force feed your body all of this stuff so that it remembers it. And then in the specific moment, you just pull it out without thought.
Yeah, just get into that muscle memory. Just keep training
Exactly.
the same action a million times. The only thing about doing that is that athletes will stay. People who do it as a hobby will leave.
Yeah, well and that's why I suggested using something like those games, right, where you have the person turn around and do so you can actually engage everybody at every level to do that and make it fun, right, without, going through the big old drill. Okay, I'm touching you here, respond this way, touch here, no. Now we're just going to have you close your eyes, crisscross your legs, uncross them, catch a ball, that kind of thing, That's what you would use.
Fantastic. Does anyone have any more questions for Zion?
Yep, it's okay.
I think you kind of answer it like a little bit this next question. But how does the guards, the positions, let's say the four basic of Lichtenauer, how they work in not getting tired too early in your
Right.
process, and also with reaction time.
So basically, When I'm fencing Lishnar, I usually operate either in the shouldered guard, the shoulder position here, or I operate in they would call fool, right? The lower position. And I use the ox positions as parries. So it could be if I'm executing a strike to a person, I'm always going to try to hit them first with something, and then the incidental response or the kind of afterblow, I'm going to cover myself from by just keeping my hand in that position. I You would want to try to keep things simple. So this obviously is attack. If it's here, it's attack. If I'm here, I'm giving you initiative. If I'm pointing towards you, I'm controlling you, right? And that's something they talk about is seeing the person in long point, using long point to kind of get the person to come out of their position and do things with them. It's the same sort of premise, right? Because when you're making earnest cuts and when you're just fighting, you're going to end up in each guard position. It's going to happen. Did that answer your question?
Does. Fantastic. All right. I think that pretty much covers it. I'll give everyone a last second just to throw a last minute question. But other than that, that's been great, man. In terms of, I guess, in terms of like, so you have your initial attacks and you have the ones that kind of go around, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The flanking attack.
The flanking attack, and then you have the anti-flanking attack.
Yeah.
Right. Can you give us another example of anti-flanking attack?
Okay. Think of it this way.
Or
Let's look at
scenario. Another like
another scenario
yeah.
of an anti-flanking attack.
Just to give
Let's say
other
the person.
people, just to give them a better understanding in case they didn't catch it. And
Yeah.
I feel
So
like
let's
that's a lot
say.
for people to absorb. But
Yeah. So let's say instead of the person flanking you to your left, so they're attacking from their right. Let's say they're going to flank you to your right. Okay? Because some people do attack from their left side, right? There's no rule against it. Some people do that. And let's say that the person is going to use a passing step to hyperangulate that attack. When I say hyperangulate, yeah, when they're going to pretty much they're going to use almost like a semicircle to attack you. Okay. Um, I'll give two examples. I'll give a defensive and then I'll give an offensive thing. So what you would do is you would counterflank by just simply using the first movement. So if the person is going to your right side, you counterflank using the first movement to defeat the weak bind by just stepping diagonal to your left. You would then hit on top of their sword with a basic parry, or you can strike to their hand, or whatever you choose to do. Sometimes it's very simple to just pronate your wrist, and I'm giving a Bolognese example here, and just thrust them. Right? Very simple. Just you're making a super wide attack around. Now I'm going to go boom, yeah, and just touch you, and that's it. Because I'm being as direct and succinct as possible. Now, if I want to use it, say in a aggressive fashion, okay, I would actually, if I have somebody who's very defensive and they're holding their swords kind of in this frame of the body, even if it's with a two-hander, okay, I would actually isolate and attack one side using one single step. So I would step right like this and attack wide to this side of the face. So really aiming right at the temple, just aiming there. Yeah. For a long sword situation, this could be simply just using a Zwirsch, just straight up Zwirsch, hitting here. Okay? They're going to respond. The whole goal of using this angulated attack is to get the person to move out of tempo by responding bigger than they have to. So you strike around, and at that point, then you can do the double Zwirsch. You can do the failure, and then you can use the Osman. So the Osman is a really good one at this point. And for those who may not be familiar with that term, is when I strike with the Zwirsch and I come with my Zwirsch from the left side, right? they're going to parry that. And as they parry that, I'm going to throw a mesotempo blow behind their sword as it's in transition. Okay? It's just something, that's an action that shows up in Vadi as well too. Those sort of half-time blows, right? For a rapier example of how I would use this is I would get the person to do the same thing. I would use a small little wrist cut, opening them up, getting them to really cover over this side. And when they bite the feint, I'm actually going to use a passata sotto, which is the touching the ground underneath and thrusting into the torso, right? Stepping the other way. So when I get them to go one way and then they go bang the other direction, and that's it, right?
Excellent. Thank you for that. No, I appreciate that. I just wanted more examples in the video for other people who are watching this on YouTube. Thank you so much. Crumpel has a feint that becomes a Zorchow. It's on the other side. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you again for this. I'm sure all of us thoroughly enjoyed this talk. There was a lot of information, so I'm definitely going to have to rewatch this one as well, just to soak it in. Again, it's a pleasure and an honor having you here. And hopefully next month we'll have another one of these lecture series. So I won't be introducing the next guest because I have to line up the next guest first. I did ask Jay Mass, and that's why he came on. But his time schedule or his time zone is just way too far from mine. So it's like 4.5 hours for me. So yeah. All right. So have a good night, guys. Thank you so much again, Zion.
Thanks so much,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.